I want to help you learn this piece in a way that will get you better results more quickly. And we'll check out some theory, technique, and analysis along the way. We'll analyze the large-scale structure as well as all the small details. There are links in the description to the public domain score on IMSLP, the International Music Score Library Project. And I'll put tabs on the screen so that you can play along. I'm trying to pack in a lot of information, so work at your own pace. I want to break it down into small, easy-to-learn chunks. Try it, and you'll see. Let's start on a zoomed-out level and ask, what is this piece even supposed to be? It's from a collection of supposedly easy guitar pieces. They always like to say it's easy. And then the only other clue we have is that it says pastoral. A pastoral is a piece inspired by the simple, idyllic life of like a wholesome shepherd living in the countryside. So it's basically a genre for well-off city folk to a sense of nostalgia for the simple life. That's actually good to know because that might help inform our interpretation. Let's check out the form of the piece. It's two halves. Each half has a repeat. And if I was playing this piece for an exam or something like that, I probably would include the repeats. I won't play them here to save time. Up to you if you want to play them. This piece is in the key of E minor, but I don't necessarily think that it means this piece has to be sad. And because it's a pastoral, it seems like it should be more mild, like maybe wistful or nostalgic. This piece is in 6/8 time. I think the biggest thing about 6/8 is it's still two beats. It's a strong beat and a weak beat. But each of those beats is subdivided into 3 pulses. So let's dive into the notes and fingerings. I want to break it down into small, easy-to-learn chunks and repeat them. We're trying to develop these automatic movement patterns. So we want our fingers to be on autopilot, but we're still going to keep an eye on the map and on where we're going. Now, what I don't want to do is what probably a lot of us have done many times, which is keep starting at the beginning. Every single time we play a wrong note or anything happens, we go back to the beginning. And we end up playing the beginning so many times, it starts to sound really good and even becomes really fun to play. And as we play through the piece, it gets more difficult and starts to sound worse because we've literally practiced that part less. Don't go back to the beginning if you stop practicing. Pick up from where you left. Today, if I practice the first 5 chunks, and tomorrow I'll start with the 6th. We're going to break it down into chunks. Each chunk is a smaller rhythmic unit. The first ones are going to be 1 beat into the beginning of the next beat. We always want to connect to the next beat. When we're doing these repetitions, let's have 2 priorities, the fingerings and the rhythm. The fingerings, we want to get the same every time. Otherwise, we're not going to develop our muscle memory. And the rhythm, we want to be able to get through the notes in time. So here's the game. Each chunk we're going to repeat 3 times perfectly before we move on. If you get it on the first attempt, then you move on. If you make a mistake even on the 3rd repetition, then that attempt is over and you start a new attempt. And then just try like maximum 5 attempts in a day or something like that, because you don't want to repeat it over and over. Just put a sticky on it and we'll come back to it later. So these triplets are the accompaniment and they're played with our fingers. We want to slightly accent the first of every triplet, and then the melody will be played with our thumb. We can skip these next two chunks because we've already done them, but the next one connects differently, so we'll start there. Now let's do the 2-beat chunks, which is a whole measure. We will still connect to the downbeat of the next. And again, we're leaving out the grace notes. In the key of E minor, the E minor chord is kind of our home base chord. And then B or B7 is our dominant chord. And that chord is used to sound like it wants to go back to E minor. So we might say that the B7 has the most tension and the E minor has the most resolution. Almost all music, we start off with the tonic or the 1, and then we have something, and then eventually we get to a 5 or dominant chord, which is the most tense or dramatic moment, and then it resolves back to 1, which is sort of the goal of the whole harmonic journey. Let's talk about the tonic and the leading tone. The tonic is scale degree 1, or in this case, E. That note is the most stable note. And then in any dominant chord, there is a note that we call the leading tone. The leading tone is a half step below the tonic, but the dominant chord needs this note in order to be a dominant chord because it's the leading tone that most wants to go back to the tonic. Now we'll talk a little bit about technique. We'll talk about these grace notes. First, they look weird, right? They're small, and that's because they're not really as important as the sort of real note. The problem is we tend to get stressed and focus way too much on them. You could just leave them out entirely, or you can work on them if you like. On the paper, it looks like it's ahead of the beat. But this isn't really meant to be literal, and actually it's sort of way harder to play this way anyways. And so luckily the sort of normal way to interpret this would be to play the grace notes together with the accompaniment on the beat. Now, one of the main things I am trying to do with my weird fingering attempt here is that I'm sort of using a normal, comfortable E minor chord fingering for this section. And then here there's this backwards feeling 2-1 switch. And so if it was only those two notes I had to worry about, I probably would have used the opposite fingering. But I'm thinking of it like this. This part is in first position, and here I totally let go of everything and shift up a fret so that I'm nicely set up in second position before I need to also execute the grace notes. Feel free to experiment with different fingerings. Just remember to keep them consistent when you're practicing your chunks. So we have the option of leaving the grace notes in or taking them out entirely. And in between those two options is the wonderful world of cheating. One option is to hammer on from our first to our third finger, but then strike the string again when we get to the main fourth finger note. I would totally consider doing this because it's a little less risky feeling. But the other thing is, if I was a singer, I probably would want to sort of nail the main note, and the others would kind of crescendo into it. But with guitar hammer-ons, we're lucky if we could even maintain almost the same volume all the way through. So I like the way this one sounds. Because the melody of this piece is in the bass, I think it's actually an advantage in this case. We want to work towards being able to control the relative loudness of the finger and bass notes. And so you could just play this chord and see if you can make the thumb notes get louder and the finger notes get quieter. And then change to the thumb notes getting quieter and the finger notes getting louder. It basically has to do with how you're setting up on the strings as you play and sort of putting your weight towards that side of your hand. Let's think of this piece as having 4 phrases, but it's really more like 2 pairs of phrases. And so the structure is basically 2 halves, and each half is made of 2 smaller parts. And with phrasing, we like to talk about it like punctuation, and so we could think of each half as having a period at the end, which sounds more final, and is usually marked by what we call a cadence. In the middle of each half, we have a sort of less final sounding pause or break, which we could think of as being like a comma. A little bit of a break, but it still sounds like it's going to continue. Another reason that the first and third phrases sound more continuous is because there are no long notes or pauses at the end. They just keep going into the next line, whereas we actually do get a bit of a break at the end of the more final sounding cadences. And so the biggest point of tension and resolution here is the very end of the piece. And then the second biggest one is here at the end of the first half. But this cadence is sort of in the wrong key of B minor, so it will naturally sound like it wants to keep going because the story can't possibly end like this. And so to shape each phrase, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's just take a very tried and true strategy of making a sort of dynamic arc where we crescendo and decrescendo over the course of the phrase. We can also use a bit of a rubato or sort of speeding up and slowing down. A sort of classic way to do it is to keep our momentum going strong in the middle of the phrase and then allow ourselves to slow down a little bit at the end of the phrases. And the reason we're doing these things is to help the audience hear the structure of the piece.